The true story of a cat who stopped a robbery in the middle of the night. You won't believe what he did. It was a cold, silent night in Lowell, Massachusetts. The clock was already past 2 in the morning, and the city was enveloped in the typical early morning silence. The streets were empty, lit only by the dim light of the streetlights, and the only visible movement was the cold wind that shook the tree branches. Inside a modest house on Westford Street, everything seemed calm. Steve Carter, a 37-year-old man, was sleeping soundly after a long day of work. Nothing indicated that that night would be different from the others. But then, something strange happened. Her cat Luke, a 5-year-old feline, started behaving unusually. He who normally slept peacefully on the living room sofa or at the foot of the bed was restless. His body was tense, his tail moved quickly, and he made small meows, almost as if he was trying to get someone's attention. Initially, it was subtle, but within a few minutes, the uneasiness increased. Luke began pacing back and forth, jumping on the furniture, watching the windows with a fixed, suspicious gaze. Steve, however, didn't understand anything, but this was all seen later on the house's security camera. Like any tired person, he ignored the noises and continued sleeping. After all, how often does a cat act strangely for no apparent reason? But that night, it wasn't just some feline eccentricity. Luke was noticing something his owner hadn't noticed yet, and what seemed like just a domestic cat's instinctive reaction would soon become an act of stunning heroism. Outside, someone was sneaking up on the house. Moving among the shadows, an attacker planned to enter silently and leave unnoticed. He was about to commit another robbery in the neighborhood, certain that no one would stop him. But what he didn't know was that inside that house there was an attentive guardian ready to act. This story happened on February 5th, 2022, and what Luke did that night left everyone surprised. A simple domestic cat managed to stop a crime and save its owner from great harm, or perhaps even worse. If it weren't for his courage and keen instinct, the outcome could have been very different. And it is exactly this real story that we are going to tell today. But before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you believe that a cat is capable of stopping a robbery? The story took place in the quiet city of Lowell, Massachusetts, a region known for its quiet residential neighborhoods and tree-lined streets. It was February 5th, 2022, a winter night like any other. The accumulated snow on the sidewalks reflected the yellow glow of the streetlights, and the temperature had dropped to 5 degrees Celsius, making the morning even quieter. Most residents were already in their homes, enjoying the comfort of indoor heating, and preparing for another day of work the next morning. On Westford Street, a relatively busy street during the day, but deserted at night, was the home of Steve Carter, a 37-year-old IT analyst who lived alone with his cat, Luke. Steve had moved to Lowell a few years earlier, seeking a quieter life after living in the busy downtown area of Boston. His home was a simple but comfortable one-story house with 3 bedrooms, a garage, and a fenced backyard. He had a very predictable routine. He worked from home during the day, and at night he liked to watch TV or play video games before going to sleep. Luke, his faithful companion, had been with him since he was a puppy. The cat was extremely independent, but also showed a strong attachment to its owner. During the day, I spent hours watching people move through the window or sleeping in the most unlikely places in the house. At night, he usually sat on the couch or at the foot of Steve's bed, rarely causing any kind of disturbance. On that particular night, everything seemed to follow the same pattern as always. Steve had eaten an early dinner, watched a few episodes of his favorite series, and then retired for bed around 11:30 p.m. As usual, he made sure the doors were locked and the house alarm was on. Nothing indicated that anything wrong could happen. But then, around 2:45 a.m., something started to deviate from normality. Luke, who was initially sleeping on the sofa in the living room, suddenly woke up. His attentive eyes swept around the room as if something had bothered him. He stood up, walked slowly across the room and stopped near the front door, cocking his ears and moving his tail restlessly. Then he looked at the side window, where the curtain was partially open, and fixed his gaze on something outside. It was at that moment that his posture completely changed. He began pacing back and forth, the hair on his back slightly standing, on end. What seemed like just curious behavior soon escalated. He jumped on a piece of furniture near the window, trying to get a better look. Then he quickly went downstairs and ran to the hallway that led to Steve's room. His meows started out subtle, almost as if he was getting attention, but within a few seconds they became louder and more insistent. Steve, however, continued to sleep soundly, having no idea what was about to happen. Meanwhile, outside the house, a shadowy figure moved silently through the yard. Analyzing possible ways of entry, Luke realized the danger before anything else, and his reaction that night would completely change the course of events. Luke had never been a noisy cat. His behavior was always predictable, balanced, and, like most felines, he preferred to communicate in a subtle way, with discreet glances and body movements. But that night something was different. His instinct told him there was something wrong, something his owner hadn't yet noticed. With each passing minute, his uneasiness increased. He approached the front door and stopped, head tilted slightly, analyzing any noise that might penetrate the walls of the house. He started to meow loudly. Luke was trying to alert Steve, but the owner, deep in his sleep, didn't notice the signs. The cat, however, didn't give up. He jumped on the sofa, then on the coffee table, and finally on the sideboard next to the door, as if trying to see something outside. What he saw or heard made him even more agitated. Now his meowing was constant. He walked quickly down the hall, stopped in front of Steve's bedroom door, and scratched hard at the wood. Steve stirred in bed, grumbling lightly, but still, not waking up. Luke didn't stop. He walked around the room, climbed onto the bed, and, in a last-ditch effort to wake his owner, jumped on him, forcing him to open his eyes. Steve woke up slowly, blinking a few times to get his bearings. The room was dark, lit only by the dim streetlight shining through the curtain. Luke was standing next to the bed, his eyes glowing in the dark, his breathing quick. The man frowned, trying to understand what was so urgent for his cat to wake him up like that. He ran his hand over his face and looked at the clock on the nightstand, 2:47 in the morning. Still drowsy, Steve sat on the bed and tried to calm the cat, but Luke showed no signs of calming down. He jumped out of bed and ran back into the hallway, meowing incessantly. Something was wrong. Curious, but not in a hurry, Steve got up, rubbed his eyes, and walked to the bedroom door. What he didn't know was that, at that exact moment, an intruder was already just a few steps away from entering his home. Luke had sensed the danger before any other signs became evident, and now time was running out. Outside the house, shrouded in the early morning darkness, a man moved stealthily through the yard, covered in a thin layer of snow. He was wearing dark clothes, a hat pulled up to his eyebrows, and gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. His name was Mark Reynolds, an opportunistic criminal known to local police for a series of petty thefts in residential neighborhoods in Lowell, Massachusetts. He had been arrested before, but always got out on bail. That night, he chose Steve Carter's house as his next target, believing it would be an easy robbery. Hours earlier, Mark had discreetly walked around the neighborhood, analyzing which houses seemed most vulnerable. With no cars in the garage and few lights on in neighboring homes, the street was practically deserted. He knew that, on that cold morning, no one would be outside to witness his invasion. When he arrived at Steve's house, he approached the back door, checking to see if any cameras were visible. What he didn't know was that a discreet security camera installed in the corner of the porch captured his movements. The next day, this recording would serve as irrefutable proof of the crime. But at that moment, The attacker was confident that no one saw him. With experienced hands, he removed a small tool from his backpack and began working on the lock on the sliding glass door. He had done this before and knew it only took a minute or two to force the lock. The absolute silence of the early morning was his greatest ally. Inside the house, however, he was not as unnoticed as he imagined. Luke, who had been showing signs of restlessness for several minutes, was now completely alert. His eyes were fixed on the glass door that led to the backyard, where a silhouette was moving subtly. His fur stood on end, and a low growl escaped his throat. Something inside him, a primal instinct perhaps, recognized that this was no ordinary visitor. The cat approached the door, paws silent on the cold kitchen floor. He noticed the slight tremor of the doorknob, the almost imperceptible sound of metal being forced. His eyes widened, and in an unexpected movement he jumped hard against the glass door, emitting a shrill meow that broke the silence in the house. The sound echoed around the room and made Mark freeze for a moment. He didn't expect such a sudden reaction. Normally dogs were a problem for trespassers, but a cat? That took him by surprise. Still, he ignored the sound and continued his work, thinking it was just a restless animal. Luke, however, was not willing to back down. He ran across the kitchen, knocking an object off the counter, making more noise. Its purpose was not just to scare the invader, but to wake its owner. In the bedroom, Steve finally felt a shiver run down his spine. Something was wrong. He heard the sound of the object falling in the kitchen and Luke's desperate meows. The cat, which until then had never caused such a fuss in the middle of the night, was giving clear signs that there was something or someone outside. And at that moment, Steve realized he needed to act before it was too late. Outside, Mark finally managed to unlock the door. A soft click sounded in the silence of the early morning, and a discreet smile appeared on his face. He grabbed the handle and began to slide the door slowly, avoiding any sudden noise. The invasion was proceeding exactly as planned. But then everything changed in the blink of an eye. As soon as the door was opened, wide enough for the intruder to get a foot into the house, Luke advanced with impressive speed. The cat jumped from the kitchen counter directly into Mark's face, letting out a high-pitched meow, followed by a terrifying growl. Its sharp claws hit the attacker on the arm and side of the face, leaving deep cuts. The impact was strong enough to make Mark lose his balance and fall backwards, hitting the snow-covered porch. The thief didn't have time to react. Still stunned by the unexpected attack, he tried to push Luke away with his hand, but the cat didn't retreat. He continued advancing, now releasing loud and continuous meows that echoed throughout the house. The piercing sound of feline screams made Mark panic. He was used to dogs that bark and attract attention, but he never expected a cat to physically attack him. The crash and the noises finally woke Steve up completely. His heart skipped a beat when he heard the sound of something heavy falling outside. He jumped out of bed, still disoriented, and ran down the hall to the kitchen. When he turned on the light, he saw the glass door ajar, and outside, a man on the floor trying to get up hurriedly. Without thinking twice, Steve ran back to his room, grabbed his cell phone, and dialed the police. Meanwhile, Mark, still in shock, managed to get up and hurriedly fled across the yard, slipping on the snow as he tried to run as fast as he could. He didn't want to wait to see if the homeowner was armed or if anyone else would show up. Luke's attack, the noise and the light turning on, were enough to convince him that the robbery had gone wrong. Steve, now fully awake and alert, checked the house and noticed that nothing had been stolen. Luke was still in the kitchen, breathing quickly, with his hair standing on end and his eyes focused on the door. He had done his job. He had protected the house. Minutes later, police sirens echoed through the neighborhood, and Steve reported everything that happened. But the detail that surprised the police officers the most was when he said that the person responsible for preventing the robbery was not an alarm system or a guard puppy, but rather a 5-kilo cat named Luke. And that's how, that night, a simple domestic cat became a true hero. Steve was still feeling his heart racing when the police arrived on Westford Street a few minutes after the incident. Sirens broke the dawn silence, illuminating the house's facade with flashing red and blue lights. 2 police officers quickly got out of the car and approached the front door, while Steve, still trying to process everything that had just happened, unlocked the entrance to welcome them. The first officer, Officer Bradley, asked the initial questions: whether Steve had seen the intruder, whether anything had been stolen, and how he realized the house was being broken into. When Steve explained that it was his cat who first detected the danger and attacked the thief, the police officers exchanged incredulous looks. Curious, they asked to see the images from the security camera on the balcony. Steve took out his cell phone, accessed the app and played the recording. In the video, it was possible to clearly see Mark's silhouette approaching the house, forcing the sliding door, and then something unexpected happening. A figure, suddenly, jumping at the intruder and causing him to fall to the ground. The police watched the scene with surprise. "So it was this cat that stopped the robbery," commented one of the officers, impressed. Steve confirmed, looking at Luke, who was now calmly sitting on the kitchen counter, licking his paw as if nothing had happened. Police searched the area, but Mark had already disappeared into the darkness. With the description provided by Steve and the camera footage, they assured that they would carry out an investigation to try to locate the criminal. The only physical clue left behind was a bloody mark on the porch, the result of the deep scratches Luke left on the intruder's face and arm. The next morning, Steve was still processing everything. He never imagined that his cat, who spent most of his time sleeping or watching birds through the window, could act so protectively. As a thank you, he prepared a special breakfast for Luke, giving him his favorite snack and an extra plate of tuna. The cat, in turn, seemed completely oblivious to its own feat. For him, everything was back to normal, but not for Steve. Excited by what happened, he decided to share the story on the internet. He made a post in a local Facebook group saying what had happened and attaching an excerpt from the security camera recording. He wrote, "I always thought cats were aloof and lazy, but last night my cat Luke stopped a thief from breaking into my house. Not only did he warn me, he attacked the intruder and made him run away. I never imagined a feline could be so brave. I think I have a little lion living with me." The post quickly went viral. In the comments, hundreds of people were shocked and delighted by Luke's attitude. Some called the cat a hero. Others said he deserved an award. The case ended up being reported on by a small local news site, and within days, large trivia pages began sharing the story. A YouTube channel specializing in viral videos even compiled a compilation of security camera footage, adding dramatic captions and sound effects to heighten the emotion of the moment. The title of the video? "Camera Caught, Brave Cat Stops Invasion and Saves Its Owner." The video surpassed 1 million views in less than a week. Steve was impressed with the response, but what made him most happy was realizing how differently people now saw cats. Many commented that they never imagined that a cat could act as a true guardian. Some even said that after this story, they started to consider adopting a feline. Meanwhile, Luke continued his usual routine, as if nothing had happened. He didn't seem interested in the sudden fame. To him, the house was safe, its owner was well, and the morning sun was still shining through the window, providing a perfect place to take a nap. Luke's story proves that heroes can come in the most unexpected ways. Many people believe that only dogs are protectors, that only they have the instinct to protect their owners and their homes. But tonight in Lowell, Massachusetts, showed the world that cats can be incredible guardians too. This story makes us Reflect on how special and surprising animals can be. How many times do we ignore the signals our pets give us? Maybe we should pay more attention, as they may be noticing things that we can't notice. And now, we want to hear from you. Has your pet ever done something unbelievable? Has he ever noticed a danger before you, or saved you from an unexpected situation? Tell us here in the comments. We want to hear your incredible stories, and if you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This helps us continue to bring you surprising stories, and of course, activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Because there are more real and impressive stories to come. See you in the next video. Until then.